Well, good afternoon, everyone. For Sean and Melissa, thank you for inviting us to participate today. So I'm Bridgitt Evans, this is Charlotte Wagner. We're going to talk about a partnership that we've forged, but first we thought we would just start with a brief introduction of our two organizations. So I'll start. Via Art Fund was founded in 2013. We're a public charity, and it was founded by a small group of collectors, art enthusiasts, and social philanthropists from across the country with the very narrow aim to just get closer to artists, their ideas, and their works, and to push that out into the public realm. And so I think we really think of what we were doing was a form of collective, collaborative philanthropy. And then we had to decide how to organize ourselves around that. And so we really modeled ourselves, which was my background, off of an investment fund. And so maybe now, Charlotte, you tell us a little bit about Wagner Foundation.
Sure. So at its core, Wagner Foundation is focused on social justice. We are working internationally and domestically across several sectors, including the arts. We take a very systematic approach to the way that we make our investments. It's very comprehensive. We often are working working to solve many problems at one time as we're making our grants. And so that comprehensiveness also is very important for us in that we have to make partnerships. Because when you're trying to change culture, change society, it's really impossible to do that alone. So that's where the focus is. So I would say, so Bridgitt, when the Wagner Foundation, we were looking to increase our investments and our engagement in the arts. And one of the things, when we were looking for a partner, one of the things that impressed me so much about VIA was your expertise around really looking at grant making and also your desire to be collaborative. So I thought maybe you could start just talking about that, and that will lead into the partnership.
Yeah, I think just to maybe dive into a little bit about how VIA is structured. I think we all have to, all of us here that are interested in this topic have to acknowledge and recognize the fact that impact is hard to measure in the arts. And some of our panelists have already talked about that today. And so the question becomes, how do we activate a new flow of philanthropy? And so at VIA, I think that we've come up with a pretty good model. I think it resonates with people. We continue to grow pretty quickly. And what we I don't know if we coined this phrase, but I think how we describe it is patron as partner model. So hopefully all of the funders of VIA Art Fund believe that they actually own part of the fund. And that's a natural outcome maybe of the fact that it was founded by donors, kind of for donors. But we really want to give ourselves agency. It's a high education model. It's a high engagement model. It's a high kind of donor agency model. And so just on a very practical level, the way that we really deliver on that is that staff looks at our grant making and our open call in 2 cycles a year and vets those proposals down to a small group that's taken forward to the partnership as a whole. We have artists or curators or institutional leaders come in and present that group of proposals. We debate it, we have curatorial input, and then each partner in our fund has 24 hours to vote. And while it seems kind of a simplistic idea, it is that agency that really drives people to, delve deeper into the material. And by delving deeper into the material, they, really start to own it. And so anyway, if you're going to have a group of people making, group decision making, then you have to have, I think, a pretty rigorous framework for analysis. And so again, kind of back to that idea of how does an investment fund work? A small partners meeting where people sit around. And so we came up early on, we all agreed on a shared set of values that would guide our grant making. So those are artistic production, funding new works of art, thought leadership, working with artists who are adding to the global contemporary art discourse, and and public engagement. So really, again, pushing art out into the public realm. And that's been really powerful for us, allowing people that individual agency while really guiding us as a group toward common decision-making. And so this year we'll grant about $1 million. 80% of that will be in what we call artistic production funds. After we had worked a couple of years, we also created, we kind of expanded to be more of a platform. So we now have programs to support curators in a curatorial fellowship. And a few years ago, we started the Incubator Grant Program, which would support small nonprofit art spaces. And that's really where our partnership with Wagner Foundation comes in, a social justice foundation. And we've partnered last year we announced $1 million grant fund, $200,000 a year, 5 organizations a year throughout the US, budgets under $1.5 million. So it's been we just announced our first 5 recipients, and it's been really successful. So I'd like to kind of tease out something from Charlotte, though, that I thought was really interesting, because when we first started talking about doing something together, my initial inclination was to think about, well, we have, all these grants we're making a year. You're a social justice foundation. Maybe you would look at the grants that, had a particular social inquiry and think about matching our funds. But you had a different idea, Charlotte, so maybe you can talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think our foundation, we really believe art is fundamental to well-being. And we also believe art is fundamental to healthy culture. And so when we start to think about the systems that are in place that prevent people from accessing culture, and that lack of culture, that lack of access, leads to continued injustices. So, we started to think about that specifically as our starting point. And the other thing that I'm sort of keenly aware of is that oftentimes when folks are talking about cultural institutions, we often talk about them in the terms of, the artwork that's being shown, and we talk about the events that take place. But we don't often, in the funding world, in the funding community, foundations especially, talk about how the importance of small to mid-sized cultural institutions in their community, that these organizations really are vital and fundamental to a healthy community. I believe someone else mentioned the University of Pennsylvania study, which was a fantastic study. It's something that we read and are, kind of took really to heart. And they basically controlled for many factors, and ultimately were looking to compare different communities and just looking at the level of cultural institutions and the availability of culture in communities. And what that study found was that where communities had culturally rich offerings, the health benefits, the education benefits were extraordinary. And so I think for us, when we think about how can we impact a system, how can we start to look at the different aspects of breaking down some of these inequities, we really started to think about wanting to invest in more community-based, smaller, nonprofit arts institutions. And I think it does 2 things, right? It's saying they are important in communities. They are going to be organizations that help to grow the community, bring people together, make the people in the community, stronger, and also, these are the institutions that the future leaders come from. They are where innovation comes from. So by putting your dollars and your emphasis on that group within the arts ecosystem, you're kind of getting 2 things. You're growing both the community level, and you're also growing the arts ecosystem writ large. So that was kind of our, why we believed that for us, and wanting to make a partnership with somebody who, is so good at what you do in terms of finding the people who are creating this wonderful artistic discourse, et cetera, that the 2 of us really would make a good combination.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you really pushed us to think about small and not only think about small, but also think about getting out of kind of the epicenters of activity for not only art kind of production, if you will, and certainly curatorial production, but also in terms of philanthropy. And so I think if we think about it, a lot of philanthropy in the arts is organized, at least historically, around cities. It's by geography and by civic concerns, which is amazing. But I think we really wanted to make a statement here, and you pushed us for that, because we look back at our incubator grants that we've made to date, open call, and they tended to be localized around, not surprisingly, New York, and then also a little bit on the West Coast. But you really pushed us, if we were really trying to make a statement about a national arts ecosystem, not only for ourselves, but also for producers of art, that we really had to think outside of those epicenters. And so I think we've been really successful at that. But
Yeah, and I think in addition to the geographic diversity, I think, making a long-term commitment, making a 5-year commitment to this fund was also extremely important, because, at the end of the 5 years, there will be 25 amazing, community organizations, arts organizations that are impacting their community and in geographically diverse areas. And I think the other thing that we have been talking about is really creating a communications platform, so that the various organizations can get together, they can learn from one another, their success and their failures, and that we can learn too. That would make us better funders, and I think we can share our learnings with the art world, and the funding that needs to happen.
yeah,
So.
yeah, awesome. So I think we're a little bit out of time, but any parting thoughts?
I think that, it's been really gratifying to work with an arts nonprofit, and your artistic expertise has allowed us to, achieve our aim, I think, and start to whittle away at some of the inequities that we see in society. And I would encourage other foundations like ours to do that, to work with nonprofits, really in partnership, to try to come up with the metrics that you may feel are important, but to really work side by side and push each other to come up with these kinds of programs, because I think that they can be very, very successful and are a different way of doing it.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think from the standpoint of an arts nonprofit, it was an incredibly rewarding experience to work closely with the Wagner Foundation, to try to understand their mission, and to have those aha moments of how we could work together for impact. And that in and of itself was super rewarding for me and for the entire VIA staff. So I just want, I'm a little bit like Dina, I want to do a call to action. I would say it is critical. We have a critical need for funding in the arts space. And when I think about other sectors of philanthropy like education or health, there are so many different kinds of ways that you can support, so many different platforms, so many different areas of focus. And the arts philanthropy sector is completely underdeveloped. We need more social entrepreneurs. We need more, confident foundations that will step up and try to make an impact. And so I'm speaking to the choir here, I think. But anyway, I just applaud the efforts of Melissa and Sean, and thank everyone for having me and Charlotte here today to tell our story.